Hi, Rod. Hi, Rod. How are you?
Hey Siddharth, I'm great, thanks. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks. And yourself? I'm quite fascinated to know about your journey. So please tell me about how your astrology, writing, and broadcasting journey began.
You know, if I can remember that far back, but it's been forever. But I
Wow.
started as a child,
Hmm.
and I think a lot of people start as children, but as a kid, I was into strange stuff. I used to have out of body experiences. I remember an angel coming to visit me, so I was interested in those kind of things. And when I was about 10, we went on holiday and bumped into a friend of my parents who was sitting drawing charts by hand. This was before computers. And so I started asking a million questions. And he said, listen, when you get back home, go and buy yourself this book. It was the Derek and Julia Parker book, Complete Astrology, which is still in print. And you had to learn to calculate by hand. But even at that age, I learned. And it started taking over my life from a young age. And even though I went to university and I studied psychology and I was going to be a psychologist, but I always used to think, astrology tells me so much more than this, and it's so much more kind of a rounded view of what a picture is. In psychology, I always got the impression you've got to be either a Freudian or you're a Jungian or something. And I used to think, what about the poor clients who don't know what you are or which choice you've made? Because astrology has got this, whatever astrology you practice, it's so person centered that
Hmm.
it always gives a valuable insight to someone, it always is a good mirror for them. So by the time I was 26, I decided, because at that stage, I finished university and went and worked in a video shop. My parents were horrified. And I used to sit in the video shop and do astrological charts for people. And one day I
Wow.
realized there's enough people. I'm going to do this. So I planned it with astrology of when to leave. I gave 6 months notice because I knew when was the best time, and I left. And from day one, literally from day one, I was all over the newspapers, which was my planning. I used my progressed moon, and if you put the progressed moon on the ascendant, it puts a lot of spotlight on you.
Hmm.
So I used that day. And both big newspapers in Cape Town published articles about this guy in the video shop who does charts. And I also had a computer. It was 1989. And the only time people had computers in their homes in those days were for spreadsheets. And computers were quite primitive. So
Oh.
they could do that. They did print spreadsheets in those days, and they didn't have graphics and computers, and it was all just green text on a black screen. And I had a computer, and I used to do astrology. I wrote the astrology software because I couldn't get astrology
Wow.
software, so I wrote it myself. And then I used to do it, and they were so fascinated by this guy who uses a computer for something other than spreadsheets that they wrote an article about me.
Hmm.
So I became well known, and I became known by the press from the very beginning. And eventually, the press knew when there was an election, when anything,
Hmm.
people ask astrologers, they've asked for thousands of years. So they'd all heard of me because they wrote the article about me, and that got me known to the media. And then I always had also started going on the radio in Johannesburg.
Oh.
Um, and I've got quite a radio sounding voice. They used to call this a radio voice. And I'm good at talking without pausing or interrupting myself or anything. So when Cape Talk started in Cape Town, they offered me a job. And I used to have a weekly show for 17 years
Wow.
where I did all sorts of cosmic and alternative things and astrology. And I would do live readings on air, and which would jam the switchboard. And that's all. They didn't care what I said as long as I jammed the switchboard. And then one day I predicted that Thabo Mbeki would be kicked out of office. And everyone said, how
Wow.
can I dare say that? And the next thing he was. So then after that, Cape Talk were using an astrologer as their little tag of why you should listen to Cape Talk. Those were different days before everything became a bit too kind of politically correct for that. But it worked for me. So I always used to say, I'm a big fish in a small pond. People don't know me in astrology, so they used to ask me. When they needed someone to write the column in the newspaper, they asked me. So I landed up getting the opportunity to write a lot.
Mm.
I was always on TV and radio until the present day. I never saw myself as a media person, but I could handle that well. I wasn't afraid of cameras. I could talk well. So that's what they cared about, not the content, but it worked for me.
Okay, so who are the people that you look up to in the spaces that you're in?
So my teachers were three very great astrologers who all died in the last 4 years. And that was Alan Oken, who became known for his book, Complete Astrology. Noel Till, who wrote a huge span of books, mostly on psychological astrology, and Robert Zola, who was the first modern astrologer to start digging into the medieval work and translating it. He was a medieval scholar. And I studied directly with him, luckily. And he was the first who started translating the old astrology. So that was very, very important to me. Today, also, and that they all died during COVID, really. So they were a very big influence on me. They all became my friends. Um, so that was a very direct influence. And then today, you also have great stuff being done in astrology. There's so many wonderful astrologers today. But what is notable today are things like the work that Nicholas Campion is doing at the University of Wales to make astrology much more anchored in the academic world. You have people like Jen Zart in the US who started the Cayley Library, which is a resource for all astrologers worldwide of just everything that's ever been published. Amazing work. So I'm excited to see that those things are happening.
But then, who are the people that you look up to more in terms of the writing as well as the broadcasting space?
Well, so writing for me hasn't only been astrology. In the
Oh, okay.
astrology writing, it was Noel Till because he
Okay.
had an impact that was very big. So I always admired how he managed to do that, and luckily for me, he wrote the foreword to my first two books. So that probably helped me also get more noticed in the States. So I always looked up to him. But I've always seen myself as a novelist. I've got lots of half
Oh,
novels. Lots of people have half novels, but I've got lots of half novels. And my favorite author at the moment is Richard Powers and uh, and Christopher Priest. I've got a great love of science fiction. Priest writes science
mhm,
fiction, and just about anyone in that space I will read. I read very widely. I believe that
mhm,
all books are good books. Even if you're going to read a trashy romance, reading is good for people. It enlarges their vocabulary. It
mhm,
helps you relate to other human beings
mhm.
because you get their stories. So there's so many in South Africa here. Megan Furness recently wrote an amazing book called Lost Property. We've had so many great writers in this country. Marlene van Niekerk in Afrikaans. I usually read the
Okay.
translation. And Michael, what's his name? Michael Haynes often translates the work, but also writes himself. So also great people to watch.
Oh, but what about the broadcasting side?
The broadcasting side, I've been so lucky to be around great people. So here in Cape Town, there's a broadcaster by the name of John Matham. He's
Okay.
actually a trained actor, but he's also been in broadcasting for probably 30, 40 years by now.
Wow.
And he's got, he's so clear and measured in how he handles things. He's also at Cape Talk where I was working for 17 years. And the thing about him, he's very balanced, he's very well spoken. He takes things he considers things before he talks about them. So he's not doing it for effect. He's not doing it for likes. He really does get the message across. And for me, I was always doing astrology, and he's a very skeptical person, but he was always very respectful of me and always gave me space on air when he was on air. So he is a great broadcaster. I love to look up to. We've got here.
And so, what have been your highlights so far in the astrology, the writing, and the broadcasting space? Your highlights.
For me, highlights are often meeting my idols. So getting
Okay.
to meet Noel Till, Alan Oak, and Robert Zola was very big for me because I started so young. I was reading their books when I was a kid. So
Wow.
to meet them, and then they became my friends. So that was very, very powerful for me, and it's been great. And also seeing astrology kind of re-enter the academic space in the UK and partially in the United States. We've seen some of that. So I think that's been very important. Um, so, and also just seeing that people today, and especially younger people, Gen Z people, they're embracing astrology again at a very large level, the way it was in history. And people these days have got the ability, especially the younger generation, have got the ability to hold these different kind of thoughts in their head, very rigid science and very arty science like astrology, which is much more complex. Young people today are used to a complex world, so they're able to hold those ideas. I'm very excited about the future of astrology because that's what I see happening is that people are embracing it correctly. They're not blindly following it. They have managed to fit it into their world with all the different input. So that's exciting to me.
But then, what about the writing highlights as well as the broadcasting highlights? Because I think you've only mentioned about the highlights on the astrology side.
Yes. Well, the writing highlights are hard to find because AI is
Oh,
taking that space
oh
over.
yeah, of course, that's true.
And so that's worrying about that. But for me, the general writing highlight is that I know that physical publishing is taking over from digital publishing again. We've gone back to that. So it means people will read books, not just
Of course.
short things. And
Mm.
then we'll see some of the great astrologers um, back in print. So, but the writing highlights are for me has been the publication of the ancient texts in modern English. They've never ever been translated before at all, and there's so many texts of the great early medieval Arab and Indian astrologers. They've been published. Even the older ones from the 2,000 years ago, the original astrologers from the first century, their works have been published. We've seen great works by people like Ben Dykes, who's a young astrologer today, who's responsible for a lot of those translations now. So that's what excites me and what I look up to in writing today.
What about the broadcasting side?
Broadcasting side, I have to also say in general terms, because what excites me is like this, is that broadcasting has been taken down from its big pinnacle and it's accessible to everyone. And so people are able to communicate their message, people are able to influence, people are able to share knowledge because broadcasting has kind of been decentralized. So there are lots of people that you are like you that I can tune into and be very up to date, be very current, and hear fresh ideas. So there's no one person today I could isolate. I mean, if I spoke about the radio, the truth is the person I like most on the radio is because she's funny. And so it's like that's a comedian in Cape Town who's got a show here. Her name is Angel. But for the most part, it's the idea of what broadcasting has become that is what I look up to.
So, what have been your highlights in all those three sectors?
I think just the accessibility of information. If I looked at highlights and lowlights, they fit in that same category. Because on the one hand, there's this great accessibility of information and sharing of information, and that's amazing. On the other hand, there's all this misinformation.
Hmm.
So if I looked at, say, like, what are my lowlights about all of this, then I would have to say, I love the fact that on Facebook or anywhere, everyone's interested in the sky. So like there was an eclipse yesterday, and there's so-called alignments of planets, and everyone's interested. And it's great that people are looking at the sky. But the low light is that everyone seems to have forgotten their primary school education about how the basics of how the sky works and that the Earth is round. So the low light to me is that flat Earthism is back and people believe any meme about the sky. You can say there's going to be two moons tonight, and it'll be all over Facebook, and everyone will be outdoors. And it's like, guys, just remember you did go to school. So that's the low light for me, but I trust that that's going to sort itself out.
So you're basically saying it's applying to the writing side and to the broadcasting side, if I'm understanding you correctly, in terms of the
Exactly.
lowlights.
Exactly.
Okay. Okay. All right. So what are your plans for the rest of this year and beyond?
Well, this year I'm doing lots of talks. Next week I'll be talking at the World Astrology Summit, which will be on Zoom,
Okay.
which is about political and mundane astrology. And so for me, my plans are shifting more and more towards that international talking. I've been doing a lot of it for years,
Mm-hmm.
but it's so become so much easier now. So to look more and more at that opportunity to talk to people and share information directly. So that's my plans, and I've got lots of those lined up. Next year, I'll be talking at the big conference, the world's biggest astrology conference. It's called UAC. It happens every 4 to 6 years. And so
Okay.
there'll be one next year in Chicago. I'll be talking there, and I'm very excited about that. So great to see so many people all sharing the same language, all excited about the same language and talking about it. So yeah, more conferences. That's the plan.
Okay. Finally, what are your words of inspiration for people that are interested in astrology, writing, and broadcasting?
So I think, firstly, for the astrology in particular, is to remember that there's essentially there's a lot of ways that we do astrology in the world, but there's the popular astrology and the kind of professional astrology. My advice is get yourself a teacher, but my so don't just learn from books or the internet. It's like trying to learn how to be a doctor from books or the internet. All the information is there, but you'll never know how to practice it. So learn from a teacher. And the great news is that there's so many great teachers. They've become so accessible because of Zoom. You can be here in South Africa and have a teacher elsewhere in the world. And that has really opened the doors. So there is good knowledge. Be choosy. Go for the best. Sign up for the courses from recognized places, because I think astrology is going places. 2,000 years ago, we were great. People loved astrologers. Uh, we fell off the wagon a little bit because other things took over. But I think that time is coming back. And young people or any people studying astrology now, there's a future where astrology is going to be much more recognized than it has been for decades, maybe centuries. So do it properly. Get your foot in the door. It's worth doing it as your profession, even though your parents and other people might think you're crazy. You're going to make it. So, because the world is ready for you. And writing and broadcasting, own it, because the whole point is it's become accessible to you. So now's the chance to get your ideas out. But I will tell you, with writing, get yourself an editor, because as soon as people see typos and grammatical errors, they throw all your information out. So you might have great information, but your writing skills need a bit of work. So get someone to work on that. That's how to make a difference and to stand out of the crowd. And the same goes for broadcasting. But broadcasting, the trick with broadcasting is speak to individual people. Don't think of you speaking to a whole lot of people. Remember, think of you speaking to your best friend, so you can get excited and you can get personal and you can get funny, and that's what makes people pay attention. So overall, the inspiring thing to me, and hopefully to everyone, about all of these things, astrology, writing, broadcasting, is accessibility means you've got a chance to get your message out. And if you make sure that you've got a good foundation, educated in astrology and the things that you love, you can go the whole way to get your message out.
All I gotta say is thanks so much for your time, and hopefully we can catch up again in the future.
It's been a pleasure. It was great talking to you, Siddharth. Thank you.
Likewise.